But now they're focusing in on, the knife. Oh, we have to have the find the knife. I wouldn't worry about the knife. Honestly, I don't care if they ever find the knife.
We're joined now by former NYPD detective Joseph Giacalone. Joseph, thank you so much for giving us some of your time.
Hop in the car, watch it go vroom, vroom. I told her mom that I will soon. Knew as a child, back in the womb. Oh, once the back, I need my room. Hop in the car, watch it go vroom. I'm in a whip, so I gotta zoom.
A social media group known as the Nerdbird Mafia.
That to the tomb. They in the way, they gotta move. I got a gas, they running on fumes. Told on my bag, it's something new. It's me and Dan, you gotta choose. I'm taking
For Nicole McKiernan, a holiday wish answered. Her 15-year-old daughter, Haley Shell, back home.
Don't take offense if I do not oblige. I can't relate but like none of these guys. They hit me once and I'm caught in the town. I was so low but I'm back on the rise, it's real. Hop in the car, watch it go zoom. I told them all that I was soon. Knew as a child, back in the womb. Oh, told us to back, I need my room. Hop in the car, watch it go vroom. I'm hopping now I gotta go. I'm looking back, they not even close. I had a 4, now I need a ghost.
What I'm more interested in is what did they find in the car? Did they recover his clothes? Did they recover the shoes that left the footprint? To me, that's a lot more important than the knife. If you can find that stuff, I'm good with this.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. Beautiful Eva is joining us this afternoon. We got cut off in our last stream. And Joseph Giacalone. I hope I'm not butchering the last name there.
That's fine.
Joseph, thank you for joining. The community is excited to talk to you. We have some footage here from the hearing today. Were you able to tune in and watch the Kohberger status hearing?
No, I haven't seen the latest from this to say I've been buried. I'm writing a new textbook, so I've been buried in that.
Why don't you tell folks, because I don't usually do the whole smash a like and subscribe, Joseph. I'm not that type of guy. We're a nerdy community. But I know that you're an author, retired NYPD detective. Also, you're a professor. I was just looking at and putting in banners. So you're also a professor. You are overqualified to be on the show. But I know folks have a lot of questions. I have questions. Let's watch that hearing. Folks did notice, Joseph, the suspect, Bryan Kohberger, had scratches on his face during today's hearing. And Joseph, you're more than welcome. The video will play. If there's any periods of pause where you want to comment, feel free.
This is cause
Okay.
number CR29222805. This is State of Idaho versus Bryan Kohberger. Mr. Kohberger is in custody. He is appearing here in court with his attorneys, Ms. Taylor, Mr. Logston, Mr. Thompson, Ms. Jennings appearing on behalf of the state. This is the time set in the matter for the preliminary hearing status conference. So I am going to inquire of counsel. Ms. Taylor, what's the status at this time?
Thank you, Your Honor. We are going to ask the court to set preliminary hearing out into June. We would request the 3rd or 4th week of June and probably 4 or 5 days for preliminary hearing. Mr. Kohberger understands his right to a timely preliminary hearing, and he's willing to waive the timeliness to allow us time to obtain discovery in this case and be prepared.
And Mr. Thompson, are you in agreement with that?
The state has no objection to that, Your Honor. Ms. Taylor reached out to us by email yesterday with her proposal. On reflection, the state's calendar would be better in the month of July, but we will make the end of June work if that's the court's preference. And I haven't had a chance to talk with Ms. Taylor about that. I'm sorry, I know that's last minute.
That's okay. The court's calendar is going to be better towards the end of June, early July. So would that work, Ms. Taylor, for your scheduling on your other matters?
Your Honor, yes. If we take that fourth week in June, that's actually best.
Okay. So, Mr. Kohberger, I need to speak to you for a moment then. Sir, you do understand, and Ms. Taylor has represented here, that she's advised you of your right to have, or fully discussed with you, the right that you have, which is to have your preliminary hearing within 14 days of the date that you initially appeared before this court. As you recall, when I advised you of your rights, that hearing is a probable cause hearing where the state has to establish that more likely than not, these felony offenses were committed and you were the one that committed the felony offenses. If you waive your right to a speedy preliminary hearing, it does not mean that you're giving up your right to have a preliminary hearing. It simply means that you would not be able to come back and challenge that the state did not present probable cause within 14 days. Do you understand?
Yes.
Have you had enough time to speak with Ms. Taylor about your decision to waive your right to a speedy preliminary hearing?
Yes.
Do you need any additional time to do so?
No.
Then I will ask at this time, as to the 5 counts, felony counts that were charged in the criminal complaint that was filed on December 29th of 2022, are you waiving your right to a speedy preliminary hearing and agreeing that that hearing can be held outside the 14-day period?
Yes.
And Ms. Taylor, do you concur with his waiver?
I do, Your Honor. Thank you.
I will find your waiver of speedy preliminary hearing is knowing, intelligently, voluntarily entered here in open court with the assistance of counsel. We will go ahead and set the matter for a preliminary hearing.
So June, everyone's sort of so surprised here, Joseph, by the June date. It's so far out. And I think folks were expecting this to move along a lot quicker, but this is his defense asking for this, right?
Right. Yeah. Who knows? Maybe it could involve things such as vacation time and everything else that goes along with it, or just other cases that they have that are active that they need to have. They might be going to trial.
Monday, June 26th.
A couple of people had speculated in the chat earlier that they're setting it so far out to kind of let the media around this case die down a little bit, knowing that they're going to eventually have to select an impartial jury. So maybe it was to kind of let the dust settle around the case.
Well, it could be, right? It also could be the fact that it prolongs the quote unquote secrecy, right? What they've been holding back about information about the case and about the investigation and what the cops know for a little bit longer. I mean, we've seen gag orders, we've seen everything so far, which normally doesn't happen in a case like this, but we're probably dealing with, I don't know the Moscow area well enough, but I'm assuming that it's a much smaller community than most, and they have to be real careful about tainting a potential jury pool, because that's going to be an issue. Not too many people are probably out there. There are some that don't know what's going on, but it's going to be tough to try to find somebody who has never heard of this case.
We heard you at the beginning of the intro saying something that I said to folks. This, to me, I've never worked law enforcement. I told you at the beginning I've been on the opposite side and luckily cleaned up my life. But the affidavit seems weak when comparing it to an affidavit or warrant like Fotis Doulos in Connecticut, or even a Massachusetts affidavit or warrant. It just seems weak. You've said it doesn't matter, right? And I think I agree with you. If that knife is found, if the victim's DNA is in his Hyundai Elantra, that would be game over, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, listen, we never say never, we never say always. But, part of that whole video, I said, everybody's kind of focusing in, we got to have the knife. I could tell you from experience, many cases go to trial without ever finding the weapon that was used in order to kill somebody. So it's about the types of evidence that you can find that you can attribute to only him. So, for instance, if he dragged in with him any evidence from any of the 4 victims, including the dog, right? So, I mean, there's a potential with that. We call that low cards exchange principle, the theory of transfer of evidence between 2 objects. When one comes together, one takes something with them and one leaves something behind. So it's important. I mean, we know that they said he, quote unquote, cleaned the car, but you know as well as I do that no matter how well you do something, there's something always remains. And I like when I teach my classes, I always tell my students, think of it if you ever made a milkshake and the top comes off and the chocolate milk goes everywhere. 6 months later, you pull a cup or dish out of the pantry and then you find chocolate milk all over it, because even though you thought you did so, right? It's really difficult in order to make sure that you got everything. It's just one of those things. So yes, I mean the clothes to me are very important, right? Because there's no way that you're going to be able to stab 4 people and not get blood or anything else on you. There could be hair follicles, the fibers from many of the girls. There's and this footprint, right? They're talking about the footprint. Did they recover the shoes? So I said, if they find the shoe that matches the print, if they find the clothes and they have evidence in the car, I mean, all I could say is for the defense, good luck. All right, that's about as much as I can say with that without being too prejudicial on it. But the issue that comes down to is, forensic evidence, the DNA, the video surveillance, the phone records, his internet records. Remember, they took a laptop out of the house too. So there's a lot of things that we don't even know. So they put enough in that probable cause affidavit just to say we had enough to arrest him. But I think there's a lot more coming.
Good observation. Good observation. I noted at his apartment in Pullman, they take out a pretty beefy tower PC, not just a laptop. It looks custom built. Those type of machines are often seen and associated with some maybe deeper activity. So it'll be interesting to see what they pull from that. What are your thoughts on this? These 2 stops in Indiana, Joseph? FBI coming out saying, look, we didn't ask Indiana State Police to do it. I've gone on the last live stream because I've really put a lot of thought into it. In fact, on one of our live streams, we actually were able to locate the exact geolocation where these stops occurred. They're within 5.5 miles of each other on Route 70. They're heading west and 9 minutes in between. Is it possible that on his way here, he did something in Indiana and that stop, that basic, is this your vehicle, is something they need to build their own case, or am I reading into that too much?
Well, I don't know. I guess, listen, any cop will tell you that we don't believe in coincidences, right? So to hear that someone's been stopped 2 times, who's also happens to be a suspect in a quadruple homicide, in a different state, I mean, I think you would be kidding ourselves, not to think that there's something afoot here. Now, the FBI coming out and saying that, we had nothing to do with it, that wouldn't be unusual either. See, a lot of times people get this whole federal involvement thing a little confused. The FBI has to be invited into an investigation like this unless it has a federal nexus, right? So if he would have maybe abducted one of the girls and bring them across state lines and then murdered them, now we have a federal nexus, right? I believe it's the Hobbs Act, if I remember correctly, where you travel from state to state and you commit a crime, a felony like this. But that doesn't happen. So the FBI has to be invited in to do an investigation like this. Their job is not to be doing car stops or anything like that. So to me, it's not unusual that they would come out and say, it wasn't us, kind of thing. So listen, is it good police work in the sense of the word that they were trying to see if they can maybe identify scratch marks or cuts or bruises, or maybe they could see some evidence in the car? Quite possibly, as long as they had probable cause to stop the vehicle. And the officer does say you're following too closely, this and that. So they probably tailed him for a while, waited for him to commit an infraction, as minor as it might have been, and they pulled him over.
So I actually, I wanted to back up for a minute. I had a question. Something we had all discussed recently was the shoe print that they found in the house. So they said it's listed as a latent shoe print in the affidavit, and it doesn't mention, other shoe prints in the house or like a trail of shoe prints. It just says a latent shoe print. If you could kind of clarify exactly what latent would mean, and
yep.
It's unusual to me. I can't imagine, like you said, he would be covered in blood after killing 4 people. I feel like there would be a whole trail of bloody shoe prints throughout the house, and they only mention 1.
Right. I tend to agree with that, right? So you have a situation, unless most of the blood gets absorbed by the mattresses and the blankets and the sheets that happen, to be there, right? So that's one thing that you could think and say, well, that why is there blood everywhere all over the floor? But you are going to have blood spatter, right? So when the knife is going in, you probably have things, unfortunately, on the ceilings or on the walls, and of course on the floor. So what you're asking about a latent print. So there's basically like three different things you have to deal with: patent, latent, and plastic. Right. So a patent print is something that's visible, which would be, something where they stepped on something, or maybe some dirt, soil, whatever that leave behind. The latent print is something that's invisible, and it requires a testing, whether it's like anhydrine or some other type of chemical that they use to bring it forward. And I think that's what they used on this. They did find it also, which makes me a little concerned in the respect that they didn't find it the initial day. I think they found it the next day or a couple of days after the actual crime. And then the last one is a plastic print, and that would have been something where it leaves like almost like a mold, and that's when you would find in dried blood or something like that. So that's basically the three types of situations that you're dealing with there. So just remember, anything latent means it was invisible, that you needed something else to bring it up forward, and that could go with fingerprints also.
Gotcha. Yeah, because we're trying to understand, from the beginning, this is something that me and Nerdy have talked about. It feels like this is somebody that knew exactly what they were doing. There was multiple, and I actually wanted to hear your opinion on that. There were so many return visits to the house by investigators. It seems like they went over the crime scene several times. We had the unknown cowboys that went out there and reinvestigated, but they went back multiple times. And we're wondering, is this because he was very careful and didn't leave a lot of evidence and they were trying to get everything they could? Or was there a lot of evidence and it was just a lot to go through and a lot to go over and a lot to photograph? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it could be a combination of both, but I think also some of the people that they might have brought in, in subsequent days and weeks afterward might have been specialists. So you might have had a blood spatter expert come in, where they have to come in and do the calculations and to try to figure out where the individual was standing when the attack was occurring. So that's a specialty, and that's something that I could never do because it involves a lot of math, right? So that's not my forte. So it involves a lots of calculations. So that could take a while. So when people say, like, where are all these people? Who are they coming in? They might be just specialists in that respect. I had some concerns. For instance, when they started giving back personal property to the family, I did an interview with that. I think might have been on News Nation, and I said, well, that effectively, for me, ends the crime scene. So at this point, I'm like, there's no going back. There's no like going in there and taking anything out. And then we did see, like, a few days later, investigators going back in, and it kind of, makes you want to scratch your head in that respect, because if when you enter a crime scene, there has to be what we've heard of as a crime scene log. Every jurisdiction might call it something different, but a crime scene log is something that it puts in the time, the date, the individual who's entering the scene, and the time they leave. Because everybody who enters that crime scene is somebody who could be called into court to testify. It's as simple as that. So they better have good records of all that. So every time you saw people going in and out, you hope that they signed in on a log. Now, I know they had what they refer to as the gatekeeper outside, right? It's cold out, they're sitting in the car and that kind of thing. But I don't see that person taking any notes. I don't know. There could be a form inside the house as soon as you walked in that they would sign in. We don't know. I say I hope, but hope is never a plan when you're dealing with this stuff. But when you hear about things such as they bagged the hands and they did all these things, I would tend to believe that this was done in proper policy and procedure on how to do it. Because, listen, that crime scene log is going to become very important. Who found the evidence? When did they find it? And what did they do with it? Right, the chain of custody, that whole thing, and those are the kind of events that could lead a defense attorney to try to go down that avenue to try to have certain things of evidence thrown out or questionable.
Joseph, this preliminary hearing that he's going to have, I presume a lot of the stuff that's in this affidavit is going to be questioned. One thing that's really come to the forefront of these cases, this genetic method of going to these genealogy companies and making links. Do you think that'll come into question at any point during this trial? What are your thoughts on a larger scale of using these systems for these type of things?
Okay, so we have really two different kinds of questions here, right? So the genetic material that they found, I don't think is going to be an issue per se on this case because they didn't use that genetic information to actually find him, right? Because it didn't come back in the CODIS, right? The combined DNA index system, it came back no hit, so they didn't have anything. They ended up getting it from the father, which means they already had their suspect, right? People are thinking like, they kind of like forget, like this isn't this big magic trick or this big puff of smoke where they say, oh, here's Bryan Kohberger, here's our suspect, all right? They had eyes on this guy for quite some time. So they already knew who they were looking at or who they, quote unquote, what we refer to as liked, right? This is the guy we liked for the crime. And they were looking for that one piece of evidence to tie him to the crime scene. So they did it in an unusual way, right? They got the DNA and they did their backward engineering with the genetics and they come up, and they say, listen, let's get a sample from the father. So we call that a DNA exemplar. But they could have saved themselves a little bit of time or that kind of effort and just get the DNA exemplar from him and then match it up to him. So they had different options. There's only 3 ways to get a DNA exemplar from somebody legally, right? You can get it from a court order, and you could get it from consent, or you could get it covertly. So if you get it consent or court order, you're already tipping off the person, right? So now they have an opportunity to destroy evidence and do things and start doing things that you don't want them to do. So the best opportunity then for you is to do it covertly, or what people like to call surreptitiously, right? Secretively. This is how they caught Samuel Little. He was a serial killer out in California. They got him off a pizza crust, right? I think the cops were actually working the pizzeria that he goes to, and they were waiting for him to leave a piece of crust behind, and they got that DNA, and the rest is history, so to speak. So they could have done something like that. It could have been a cigarette butt. It could have been a bottle of water. You name it. That's the kind of thing that they could do. But I guess they figured it would be easier just to get a sample from the father and then do it that way. I don't think that's going to be an issue because, like I said, they could just get a court order now and test it. So.
And they took DNA from him during his arrest in Pennsylvania directly from him. So if that now does tie into other crimes of CODIS, and I guess that's really what people are really wondering about. Does it stop here? Is this a person in which he's, there someone in this group of 4 really ticked him off, and this is the first time he's killed anyone? Or do you believe, based on the behavior he's showing and what you've seen, and there's very little. We pulled up some Tappa Talk. He basically went on there and shared his medical issues back in the day. Eva can get into more of the visual snow, depression, and we verified that as his account. So, this is a younger Bryan Kohberger from 2011, 2012 that's describing some growing pains. And then you get into these women that have said, I went on a Tinder date with him. He was tickling me. He was asking if I have childbirthing hips. Now, look, I'm a weird guy too, and I make really weird jokes. And unless you understand the context of that, a lot of people, I'm sure, think I'm bizarre. But given all his behavior,
you should hang out with cops then. You think that's
cops
weird.
love me. Cops love me. But we have dark humor, right? When you've been through dark stuff, you have darker humor. And but do you think he's going to be? Do you think this is going to be serial? Do you think there's going to be more to this story?
Well, I find it hard to believe that someone just graduates to something like this so quickly, right? But does that mean that has never happened before? Of course not. I mean, it has happened. So, one of the things that you always base your theory on. So if you're the detectives in this case, and I know probably most of your listeners or a lot of the true crime community, sometimes they miss this kind of nuance. So the detectives get together. So, think of the analogy of a football team when they're out doing the huddle. And they're coming up with their theories and they're developing thing. And there's always that one guy or girl in the huddle that just gives you the most bizarre type of theory. But none of that stuff is discounted until you let the evidence lead your path, right? So this is something that I think a lot of people can learn a lesson from this case, because we know there was lots of conjecture and speculation going on, and then all of a sudden, like they come up with this thing, and nobody had this guy. But there are certain similarities that you see in cases, and generally somebody who uses a knife, who gets that angry, there's generally some sort of relationship there. I always say it's very difficult to get a stranger that angry at you, right? Generally, the strangers, they can get mad and maybe they punch you or something like that, but to be up and close and personal on somebody and be able to look at them in the face while this is going on, it lets you know the type of individual that you're looking at. And also in cases where you've had stab wounds, the person leaving DNA behind is very high. You know, and there's a possibility that he could cut himself or, and leave DNA like that, his own blood behind, because, as the knife goes in, it's not like TV, right? Where the knife just goes right into the body and everybody dies in 6 seconds because they have to do this with 45 minutes and 3 commercials. It doesn't happen that way in real life. Somebody tries to protect themselves, they put their arm up and they end up getting stabbed in the upper arm, or, they get a bone gets hit and the thing kicks back. I mean, there's all those kinds of things that you don't plan for while this is happening. In the beginning, I said there was somebody that they knew, somebody that they, there could be some, tangent that he was involved with some of the other, kids in the frat houses or whatever. I don't know. But, I believe that the investigators do know. There are certain clues to let you know that. I mean, if you looked at the day before the arrests, I did a Law and Crime Network thing, and they asked me, do they have suspects? And I said, yeah, they have suspects. I mean, and they're like, well, how, what makes you think, what made you think that? Right? If you saw the chief the day before, he was like leaning back in his chair. He didn't have any stress on his face. I said, that looks like a man that has a suspect. So, they know a lot more than they tell you, and that always happens. And I know that kind of upsets a lot of people out there. Like, they should tell us. And I'm going to say something that's probably not popular, but unfortunately, the general public is not privy to any of that information. The only thing that they're really privy to is if there's a general threat to the public at whole for their safety. Beyond that, they really are entitled to anything. I know. So, don't throw any eggs at me, guys, but that's just basically, what really happens. I know. And in this, day and age of social media and everybody's, latching on to certain things and doing things, you have to be patient too, because let the process, play out, so to speak.
Yeah, you bring up some issues from the beginning, right? Just logical observations. The brass balls on someone to walk into a home with 6 people and a dog, not knowing if they're armed, not knowing what the situation is there, implies exactly what you just said, that some of this stuff and why we brought you on the show, because some of it's just plain logic. Trying to think of other these cell phone tower pings that sort of line up with his car. That's just police making sure that there's a known connection, that it's in fact him driving that Elantra. So he's not going to come in and say, look, that you saw that Elantra on camera, but there's nothing else associated with it. They're saying in that affidavit, look, here's a cell tower pings to prove that this is his car in conjunction with him traveling at whatever rate of speed, et cetera.
Well, there's a couple of things there with that car, right? So yes, the pings put him in that car, and also those car stops put him in that car too, right? He is driving it. He's in possession of it. He's actually the one that has the car re-registered too in his name, when he switches, I believe from the PA, the Pennsylvania plates to the Washington State plates. So yeah, so that they have established that. The thing about the cell phone records, which is always interesting to me, is like I wrote about this. I said there's basically 3 forensic horsemen moving forward that are solving cases, and that's cell phone records, internet records, and video surveillance. And what you're seeing in this case are all 3 of them coming together. Yes, you have DNA. I always say DNA is a separate category. You don't include it in those kinds of evidence, right? It's just something totally different. Specifically about the advancements in DNA, things can change, on a weekly basis with that kind of stuff. But those other 3, they kind of remain the same. Which one thing that nobody's really talking about or focusing on, and I said, there's I believe there's like an hour where they have the cell phone records from when he leaves the house. I think he goes to the university first, and then he goes back to his house, if I remember correctly. I mean, I've got a lot of things going on, but I think that's pretty much like the triangle that we're looking at, right? The victim's house, the university, back to his apartment house. We know that the universities have surveillance camera, and I'm assuming that the apartment complex has security cameras too, right? I mean, yes, we're totally, I'm taking a guess here, but I'm assuming that they do. So I think we'd be foolish not to think that the police don't have that video surveillance too. I mean, think about how damaging that could be to his defense team if they have, video of him in certain things. So that triangle too would be something that I'd be focusing in on for the evidence, right? That we call that the extended crime scene. Did he throw something out of the window, like the knife on his way out? Did as he's driving by, did he dispose of, any of the clothes or anything else that has to do with it? So those are all things that I'm assuming have been done. But remember, there was also a lot of snow that happened too, so that kind of might have messed up some search patterns for that too. Excuse me.
Yeah, and touching on where they were triangulating him and trying to place him to, they see him driving into the neighborhood. So they have surveillance of this car entering the neighborhood just before the murders happen, and then seen speeding out of the neighborhood at a high rate of speed just after. And they don't give us, I think there's only like 2 exact timestamps in the affidavit, and then all the rest of the times are approximate. But, you know, something we were all trying to figure out, and there's a lot of speculation around this of whether or not he did this alone or it was more than one person, is the time that it took to do it. I went over the affidavit, and from the times that are in there and the timestamps that they give, conservatively, the most amount of time that I could give him from the time he enters the house to the time that he walks out of the door is like 14, 15 minutes max that he's taking to kill 4 people. Is that possible? Is it something feasible? Or is it more likely that he had an accomplice? There was somebody else maybe driving the car and he went in and did this?
Well, listen, that is something that you always have to keep on the table, right? If it's one person or another. The other issue that comes down to is that DoorDash delivery too. That kind of narrows that time frame. So that time frame they do is pretty, it's pretty set in stone. That I think it was 4:07 or 4:12 or something like around that time, right? When she gets this delivery, that kind of locks that timeline in, saying that it had to happen, right after that, and then they had the car leaving at a certain time too. So. Yeah, I mean, listen, anything's possible. Do I think that somebody else was there at this time? Now that I know what I know, I would probably say I think he was by himself doing this. But here's the other thing: they have his cell phone records around that area way before the crimes even happened too. And he got a summons, I think, for driving without a seatbelt or something like that, right? He got hit, he got a summons for something, before these events happening. So I think they're showing up front with that affidavit that there was a pattern of him, staking out the place, looking at it, waiting for his opportunity to do so. The idea behind this whole thing is, and the $1 million question is why? Why did he do it? It's something. Do we need to have the why in order to, solve the case, so to speak? No, but I'd like to see it. We'd like to know about it, and I think the jury would want to know about that too.
This behavior, it's drawn a lot of criticism from both sides of the roommate. This roommate that observes and is in this affidavit observing a masked man at 4 a.m. Not only observing, but describes something, right? If it's just a masked man walking through the home, then why go into shock? And a lot of people have felt one type of way about it. I have a lot of questions, but I also defer to empathy and have leaned on medical professional and behavioral professionals to sort of guide me along this. But what is your take on this? And is it going to be problematic if it goes to trial?
Well, I mean, I know people have a lot of questions about, what took so long for somebody to call the police, right? Well, everybody handles shock and trauma differently. I've listened to a lot of experts talk about these kind of things. Myself, I really can't give an opinion per se because, not for nothing, I've seen a lot in my career, right? So things generally don't disturb me. If you said to me, "Hey, Joe, there's a pink elephant in the lobby right now," I'd be like, "Okay, let's go look at it." So it's just one of those things. But a 21-year-old who has never really experienced anything like this before, could they shut down? I think it's quite possible. I really don't know, right? So it could be part of a PTSD thing, right? So I think I would have hoped that somebody would have called 911 a lot sooner, because I think that's going to open up some cross-examination that should be interesting, per se. And I think, listen, if you're a defense attorney, I mean, this is something that you want to focus in on and key on, right? Missing times, missing that timeline that Eva was talking about. Eva was talking about, where timelines are really important. You're looking at a victim's timeline, you're looking at the suspect's timeline, and then you're adding in a third timeline with the investigators when they finally start doing this. So all of those things they try to plot together to find out when time the suspect and the victim come together. That's when your crime happens. And there's a lot of things that can throw that off, including when the coroner, medical examiner, or medical legal investigator pronounced the time of death, right? So I try to tell people sometimes you can have 4 or 5 different times of death in a case, and it could really put things on, right? You have the time that the EMS says that the person's dead. You can have the time that the medical examiner says that they're dead. You have the estimated time of death. You have the physiological time of death, right? So there's so many different things that you have to deal with as an investigator to try to put these puzzle pieces together. But like I said, until I would defer, like you said, defer to people who have dealt with this kind of behavior in people, and to say that, it's I think it's unfair to say that, oh, come on, how could this person shut down for that long? I don't think that we could be fair unless we really know exactly the extent of the trauma. I mean, there's a possibility she walked in the room and saw some horrific things and just shut down, and she doesn't even remember. Right? It's not unusual to hear people that have blacked out and not remember things. So we shall see, like they say.
Yeah, and it was something that we talked about this week too. It was kind of a heated debate throughout the week because, naturally you read that, you wonder why it took so long for police to be called. But something that we've said and everyone else has said, and I think the one thing that we can all agree on is that we only know what's in the probable cause affidavit. There's probably a lot more to her story that would, be the missing puzzle piece to that too. But speaking of how long it took for police to be called, there were several people before the cops even got there because, other people were involved in making the phone call. Apparently these girls were very upset and in hysterics, and other people entered the house. Do you feel like that contaminates the crime scene at all, or is that going to be problematic for the prosecution?
Anytime someone enters the crime scene, including the police, you're contaminating the crime scene, right? So it's just the nature of it. I mean, there is no such thing as a pristine crime scene. Somebody has entered it, including that first officer or officers on the scene, right? So when those uniformed cops show up, the second they step foot into that house, they are, they're basically committing crime scene contamination. That's why when, I was back in the day teaching detectives and the stuff, I say, if they ever ask you, did you contaminate the crime scene when you would get there? You never say no, because the second you step into it, you contaminate, right? There's a lot of evidence dynamics, which we refer to, things that are sometimes beyond your control. The police can enter a location under the emergency exception looking for additional victims and, of course, the perpetrator. So they have to make a complete inventory of what's going on in that house, right? So if you have 4 bodies, could there be 2 more or 3 more? Sure, that entire house had to be searched. And what happens is you run the risk of somebody stepping in some blood or something and then dragging it somewhere else. The only thing I could tell you is that more than likely the shoe print didn't come from the police, because people say, oh, they're not wearing Vans shoes, on patrol. So I don't think it's that. I mean, could it have been maybe by another cop who comes in plain clothes and is wearing those kind of shoes? Maybe, right? So you have to exclude all others when you regards to that. But evidence dynamics plays a big role in this. So yeah, there's no such thing as a pristine crime scene.
It's a reminder to people in the chat, this is a suspect. He's not presumed guilty. He's afforded the process that every American is afforded, which is due legal process. So, and the same for the roommate. Like, I'm really hopeful. I'm disappointed, Joseph, the late June date, because like you said, I think there's a lot of people that are curious, but we're not entitled to this information, right? We want justice for these 4 victims. But I also, on the opposite side of the spectrum, I think June is a good cool off date. It's also a good amount of time if he's connected to other crimes. I don't want to have this roommate come up for a preliminary hearing as a witness if she doesn't have to. If there's already solid evidence in other states that are going to start binding him to other crimes, let that process play out. And I think it'll play out, and June is a good time frame for that. And also, something else I've observed, no one's gone hard on these, and I don't think anyone should go hard, but no one's pointed out the criminology students that observed this man in a college class. This is like a professor who does political science that just watched the insurrection happen yesterday and just completely ignores it. These criminology students should have, they're coming out now after the fact and saying, look, he didn't talk about that. That's weird. But I feel like they probably should have notice that. And I mean, this is the future of our law enforcement, right? A lot of these students in this criminology class are going to be future law enforcement. So I think there could be criticism everywhere around, but at the end of the day, the most important thing is justice for these 4 victims.
Well, certainly, right? And also too, we the criminology aspect of it is it's pretty narrowly focused course of study, right? So you're really talking about the behavioral aspect of things, the psychology and the sociology behind crime and why people commit crimes and those kind of things. It's not really a course of study that really gets involved in forensics and investigation and those aspects of it. And I've been asked that question a million times just because of my affiliation with the school, right? And I would say, listen, we didn't stop teaching business classes after Bernie Madoff got caught doing his stuff, right? So, I mean, the list could go on and on. You can name it. We've had nurses that have gone on to be serial killers. Does that mean we canceled medical classes? I mean, it's not about the course of study. It's about the person involved. Some of the things, there was, I had a couple of issues, in the beginning. For instance, I thought they waited a little too long to put the car out. I think they should have put the car out when they had it, and that reward should have been given then about the car, and also too the fact that some of those things with the crime scene per se, how that was handled. But you know what? It's easy to Monday morning quarterback these things, right? It's easy to be a talking head. It's easy to sit on television and say, oh, you could have done this, you could have done that. It's very easy to point fingers at people, right? And with the definition, I think it was Teddy Roosevelt said the definition of a critic is somebody who walks up to the battlefield and shoots the wounded, right? So this is, it's very easy. And sometimes I think that gets lost in the translation, especially on social media. And, everybody has the answer. Everybody has, know how to do this. If you've listened to any sports radio talk show, right, the Monday morning quarterback stuff, it's very easy to say, oh, I would have done this, I would have done that. But you're not on the field. You're not making that split-second decision. And listen, investigations, the more you do them, the better you get out of them, right? Just like a lot of things that we do. The police department got beat up unmercifully. I mean, and I give the chief a lot of credit that he kept a stiff upper lip, and he remained professional during that entire time. And, we had the state involved, you had the FBI involved, you had this whole collaborative effort that happened. And I think it shows you, even with little experience of the case investigator, remember that became an issue, right? Oh my God, this guy only has a year doing this stuff. I mean, that became an issue. Well, you have to learn sometime, right? You gotta cut your teeth somewhere at some time. So the state of Idaho doesn't have a lot of homicide to begin with. I think I look back, I think on 2020 was the latest stats that they had. They had 41 in the entire state. When I was a sergeant in the 7-3 precinct in Brownsville, I think we had 88 one year, just in a 1 square mile precinct. So when you're talking about the day in and day out grind of dealing with shootings and dead bodies all day long, compared to a state that rarely has one at all. So yes, experience does matter, but you know what? There's only one way to get that experience, and that's by doing it. And unfortunately, I think the patience was a big factor in this. Everybody, I think, in this day and age of, no more 22 minutes, we give you the world, right? It's more like 22 seconds, you got to give me the world, and you got to go, and we got to move on to the next story, and we got to go to the next one, and this and that and the other thing. As I get older, I'm slowing down myself. So it's tough to keep up on it. I try to do all the social media stuff. I try to get involved in things, and sometimes I get overwhelmed, right, when people just bombard you with stuff, and I'm like, whoa, because it's so many different things coming at you. So just think about what this young detective had to do, and think about it. He's watching the news. He's listening to things, or she. We don't even know if it's a male or female. I don't think, but. Could you imagine putting yourself in that person's shoes, right? You're hearing all this stuff in the background, all this, and you're trying to, concentrate on doing this thing. And I try to tell people all the time, cops are human beings. We don't come from any special place. We have feelings. We have, words can hurt you, this and that. The older you get, the less you care, of course, but and the more, the harder you get, the turtleback kind of thing where, people can say just about anything you want to yourself. And at this point in my life, it says more about you than about me. So that's just the way I just handle those kind of things. Because, you get the detractors and the haters and the people who don't like cops all day long. And, if you're going to be on social media, you have to deal with the haters. And I try to tell people they don't even like themselves. So what are you worried about? Why are you worried about the criticism? They criticize themselves. So it's just an important aspect to remember that the next time something like this happens, just remember that those are real people behind the scenes that are trying to do the best they can, and we don't want to make that job more difficult than it already is.
One of the things you hit on earlier was that evidence sort of preservation. Something we see in New England all the time. Elijah Lewis, a little boy that went missing and was found deceased. Anyone even driving on the road while they were digging, searching for 2 days had to stop. Massachusetts State Police would write them in. They take their ID. And it was like a 1 mile road. So your point is well taken. I'll have to go back to footage and see if that process occurred. But yeah, in that same breath, right. Watching grown men have to spend their Saturday morning digging up a young boy's body puts things in perspective, whatever side of the spectrum you're on. Like you said, we're all human. And I think just like any profession, I've said this consistently, I'm not against cops, right? We talked a little bit about this at the beginning before we went live. It's just that I've been programmed a certain way, and I've been programmed to be on the other side of that. But when you take in the totality of what police do, suicide saving, you were there in 9/11 to respond. The job, especially in New York City, is not an easy job. You have to have tough skin for that, and it's appreciated. It's appreciated you coming on today to explain to folks the process and just being logical about it. I think that's appreciated because, as folks know, I've always said I like to hire people smarter than me, and you're way smarter than me. I'm not in your field, and so hearing from someone smart is refreshing. So thank you.
Well, thanks for having me. But you're also talking to the guy who couldn't get his camera to work about 5 minutes before we started this stuff. So just remember that everything's relative, right? So yeah, I spent a long time doing this, but you know what? The technology part of it and everything else. Everybody has an expertise. Everybody can teach from everybody, and even myself now, well into my 50s, I'm still learning every day. And sometimes I always tell people, you don't make mistakes, you just learn lessons, and that's the kind of attitude that you have to have going forward. And it's sometimes it could be as simple as that.
Definitely. If it makes you feel any better, too, half the time we don't get our cameras to work. We're usually down to the wire and here arguing about headphones or the cameras, so it's not just you.
Well, we got it to work, so we're good.
I once, during the Brian Laundrie case in Florida, I once surveyed a car for about 10, 15 minutes, Joseph, before realizing it was my own car, my own rental car. I had the drone flying above it. It was embarrassing. But we appreciate your time. We appreciate your input. I want to quickly scan for comments. Eva will too, just to make sure that phone line's open, guys. If anyone has questions for Joseph, this has been refreshing. This has been really informative, so it's appreciated. I want to just scan comments real quick. Eva, I'll let you take the mic for a second and see if there's anything that we can ask.
Yeah, definitely. I think I have a question. Going back to DNA, I've heard a lot of talk about the DNA found on the knife sheath. It's touch DNA. And someone, I can't remember where I was watching it the other morning, was saying, this can kind of be iffy because touch DNA is very controversial. It's been thrown out of some cases. How strong is that? And hopefully, like you said, hopefully there's a lot of other DNA found in other places. Hopefully there's stuff found in his apartment, in the car. But how much of a factor is this going to play, the DNA found on the sheet?
Well, I'm sure the defense attorney is working on that already, right? So touch DNA, we know, can last for a long time on what we call a substrate, right? So an object that is left on. And that's part of the thing, right? So they might say that maybe he was there earlier and he left it there another time. I don't know. I mean, that's the kind of, when you start to try to put yourself into the mindset of a defense attorney, I mean, these are the kind of things that you think about. But yes, we have, the touch DNA, you have familial DNA, we have mitochondrial DNA, not to bore everybody with all the different types of DNAs, but there are so many different things out there. But the one thing that you need to always keep in mind, and I didn't look this up because it just kind of dawned on me. There are two standards for acceptance in court. I don't know what state I don't know what court case Idaho follows, but there's just two standards. It's a Fry standard, and that's F-R-Y with an E at the end, the Fry standard, and the Daubert ruling. And the Fry standard is a much tougher standard to get things, like DNA evidence acceptable into court. So that could play a big role in this. And we're going to see lots of pretrial hearings, before this. I mean, we're going to have things such as the map hearing, that's with two P's, right? Map versus Ohio, about search and seizure and evidence. And then we're going to hear about all the DNA. If it's a Fry state or a Daubert state, they're going to have all these experts and then figure out who is going to, basically win those things. I think during those events, I think we're going to find out a lot more than we know. And some of us will be more comfortable, and some of us will be like, oh boy, that doesn't sound good. But we can't make that determination until we actually find out what they have. I kind of hope that kind of answers that whole thing.
If you were hired by the families, no, let's not say the families, because let's just say you were hired as a general PI, and you wanted to see if he was a serial killer. Where would you start? Would you start in Pennsylvania, where he went to, where he started his life? We see Nancy Grace parked out in front of that house. Somebody sent me a video.
With the card table, yeah.
Somebody sent me a video. I guess these Barstool from Twitter somebody put up a sign that says "F you, Nancy Grace" over in Idaho. But as opposed to sitting out in front of a house, what would be the most? What are investigators doing? And for someone like me that wants to travel and has a beautiful girlfriend that allows him to travel to Pennsylvania, where would you go in Pennsylvania specifically?
Well, listen, we would go to every place that he's lived or worked, right? So we have the FBI already on the case, and we know that the FBI has VICAP, the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program. And the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program is just what that does, right? It tries to match up similar crime scenes, similar behavioral issues in crime scenes, and try to see if there's match up anything from coast to coast in the United States. So when I was the commanding officer of the Bronx Cold Case Squad, we had cases that we would go through VICAP with and be able to see if there's some sort of connection. Because one of the things you always try to do as a detective is to see if your case is connected to to some other case. Why? Because each one of those cases that you find, there might be a key that will unlock another thing in another case, right? So you just kind of do it. You just kind of go about your business that way. Sometimes you're lucky, sometimes you're not, but that's basically the way they have to go about doing it. And unfortunately, over the last couple of years, we've had some issues with the crime reporting, right? So as the FBI transitioned from the supplemental homicide information and gone into the new NYBRS, right, where we kind of switch over our uniform crime report, crime stats have gotten awful, for a lack of a better adjective, right? So I think was last year, Los Angeles Police Department, New York City Police Department didn't even report, homicide figures to this thing. So that could be damaging for God knows how long, for a couple of years before they get before they get this thing back on track. Most people might not realize that the Uniform Crime Report, where we always talk about crime stats and murders up, murders down, is done on a voluntary basis, right? It's not mandated. I think it should be mandated. I think they should give some incentives for it, because we want to have the best data available to try to, track down information and connect cases. We refer to them in the police department as pattern cases, right? You'll never hear a cop say serial. Like, oh, we have a serial killer or a serial robber or a serial rapist. They'll always say we have a pattern case, because why? That word serial kicks off a whole bee's hive, that kind of thing. People just go nuts when they hear that word.
Yeah. Just the word and the public perception, of course. Some questions here. Lori's asking, what does it mean by single source DNA?
Meaning that they have excluded all others, right? There is nobody else that could have left that DNA could belong to, and that's basically what you're referring to there. I think they said it was 99.9 something 9999 that it was this individual. So I said, if you had a chance to win the Mega Millions at $1 billion plus, and I told you had a 99.999 chance to win it, would you bet? You throw everything you got on the table, including the house.
I'll wait another 2 years until I have 5 years total sobriety under my belt before I start winning millions of dollars, Joseph. Another question that came through. Let's see. So they're talking about the knife. So during our course, the affidavit, you see he drove 55 miles away. One would look at Johnson, Idaho as a cell tower and say, oh, it must be close. No, it's pretty far away after the murder. So the night of, he goes away, turns off his cell phone for 3 hours, and people are asking about the knife, because I've sort of speculated, well, this would seem like a good time window to turn off your cell phone and get rid of that knife near a national forest, reservoirs, etc. But you're saying it's not that important. There's other things that are more important. But I guess it's still curiosity would ask, how much effort is law enforcement spending on trying to find this knife? So if they see this like we do in this affidavit, they probably get the same hunch that we have, right? How much time are they spending looking for it?
I think at this point, I think they did their search for it, and at this point, we don't know if they found it or not, right? So we have no idea what's going on in that respect. And like I said before, look, would I like to have it? Sure. Do they need it in order to solve their case? No, they don't, right? Other items I think would be much more valuable, like we outlined in the beginning of the show. And I'd rather see that stuff than spend the time, looking for the knife at that point.
So folks are asking, I think it's because I obviously haven't been following what's going on, but I think it's a theoretical question. What would stop an investigation like this? And I would answer, if they presume they have the wrong person, it would really be the only thing that would stop it, or a mistake on the prosecution side, right? There's nothing else that would stop this investigation.
No, nothing at this point. And at this stage, before you make an arrest, you have, you do your due diligence to exclude all others, right? So that's the bottom line. And that was why I was a little concerned about removing property too soon, personal property too soon from the crime scene. And then they brought in the, what we refer to like the wrecking crew, right? They came in, they started, to dismantle the place, and then they stopped that, within a few hours. So there was a couple of little, let's call them hiccups, right? That could present, certain issues. But at this point, there are plenty of things that the defense attorney is going to, prey upon, so to speak. If they can't if they can't make the evidence go away, they go after the investigation. That's basically the tactic. And, we give defense attorneys a lot of grief, right? But, they're just doing their job too. And this is what they do, right? And if you're a police officer, you understand that's the game, right? That's the nature of the thing. It's like the sheepdog and Wile E. Coyote, right? They're always fighting, and at the end of the day, they punch out together. All right, see you tomorrow, Sam, kind of thing. So it's just that's just the way the courtroom work group goes.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. Any more comments here that we need to get to? I don't think so. I think we're good. Did you want to touch briefly? I know you've been also on the news as related to Brian Walsh and Anna Walsh. It's a case that we're following, obviously, because I'm from Connecticut, but this community focuses a lot on domestic violence, missing children, or women that are exploited. So it's a case that obviously we've gravitated to. What are your thoughts there? I mean, it seems like this is the stupidest criminal of 2023 yet, right?
Well, like I said, sometimes you better be lucky than good, right? So that's the what we're dealing with. That, I mean, there's a lot of things that go on here. Once again, what's the motive behind this thing? And just for your audience, I think I saw something about motive, whatever, too. There are lots of motives that people could do things for, but I always concentrated on the three homicide triangle: love, money, and drugs, right? So generally, most of your cases revolve around those three in somewhat. I know people say, well, what about revenge? Well, that could be because, love, right? Somebody found a new love interest, and then so they take revenge. But anything other type of, I would say, any other motive that you could come up with, you can tie it into one of those three. And I think we'll see that not only in Massachusetts case, but I think we're also going to see it in Idaho case.
We got 2 minutes left. I'm going to let Eva have the last word. My last question, Joseph, here. Every female across the globe wants to know, including Eva. She sometimes just wakes up out of her sleep at 2 a.m. and says, who were those cowboys? Who were the cowboys that went on that scene with their cowboy hats? Any idea who those guys were?
No, I would probably say they were feds from, a state that wears cowboy hats, so they were specialists and that kind of thing. I mean, there's no reason to be wearing, a cowboy hat in Idaho, especially during the snow. But, my thing is they were a special team from somewhere else in the country. They've flown in. I guarantee you there's some sort of federal agents.
That's what everybody was thinking. It was so anticlimactic too, because it was like we get these nice dramatic shots of these cowboys going in the house in their hats, and we're like, ooh. They come out, and the guy couldn't even get in the van, like get stuck in the minivan door, and it was like, oh.
Yeah, I saw that, and I said, well, that guy's definitely not a father. That's the first thing, right? So you look at those things, and you always try to. Unfortunately, sometimes, now that I've been out for about 10 years, I still can't turn off some of these things that you just, you look at and you just see things or hear something, and I'll be out with my wife and I'll say, did you see that? And she'll be like, what are you talking about? It's not going to, it's, it is what it is. I always tell people, as long as you're inquisitive, as long as you're, I hate to say, use this word for the true crime community, like having a good time, so to speak, but meaning you enjoy the hunt, you enjoy the, that kind of stuff. Not like you're, glad that somebody got murdered. So don't get me wrong on that, but I think you kind of get my drift. But my thing is just be responsible, right? I mean, they were calling out people, naming names, you name it, right? So you can get somebody hurt really bad. There's people out there would take revenge. So be real careful doing that.
Joseph, I wanted to thank you for your service, you coming on today. I want to give you a moment right now to tell people where they can find you, right? You're going to have a lot of people interested. Where can they find you on social media? Take some time to give a shout out for your own cause, all right? Go ahead.
Okay, I am on Twitter, and it's at Joe Giacalone. There it is right there. I'm also on Facebook. I have a page that's Joseph L, like Larry Giacalone, and my last name. It's a Facebook page that I have lots of things with the media, and I talk to people that want to ask questions. And I have a website, josephgiacalone.com. If you send me, a question, whatever, I'll try to answer it as soon as I can. Unfortunately, I've been a little busy. I'm writing my second textbook now. This one's on cold cases. I wrote a general criminal investigation textbook that I just finished. Yeah, the 4th edition now. I just finished it. That is gone to the publisher. That should be out, hopefully, I think they said in the first week in February. So that first edition, I think, came out in 2011. So here we are, 12 years later, and then we're up to edition number 4. So I'm kind of proud of that. I could tell you, anybody who's writing books, it's easier to write a book than to do another edition. I can tell you that. Just start over from scratch. Oh, my God. If I had hair, I'd have pulled it out. So it's difficult.
I appreciate you coming on. Sorry, Eva, I'll let you end it after this, but I just wanted to say it's an honor to be able to, in the course of my recovery, be able to interact with people that I once was belligerent with. I now have Secret Service contacts in Department of Homeland and now an NYPD detective. So I am proud of that, to be able to have you on here and talk sensibly about this, logically. So thank you very much. For folks that are joining, follow him, please. Like and subscribe. Keep your head facing the light, guys. Be kind to each other, and we'll see you again. And Eva will have the last word. Thanks again, Joseph.
Take care. One day at a time.
I just want to say thank you so much. This has been awesome having you on and being able to pick your brain about all of this. We hope that you'll come back again so we can discuss other cases, because it was a pleasure having you. And hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too. Thanks for having me, and we'll talk again.